Hello, everyone, and welcome to this captivating educational journey where we delve into the life and legacy of one of history's most renowned explorers, Christopher Columbus. This is not just a story about voyages and discoveries. It's a tale of determination, hardship, and an unyielding quest for knowledge and new frontiers. Together, we will explore the fascinating events that unfolded between 1436 and 1506, shedding light on how these moments shaped our world today. Let's set sail into the past and uncover the remarkable story of Christopher Columbus. From very early times, overland routes facilitated trade between Europe and Asia. By the 15th century, this traffic had increased significantly, enriching merchants in Western Europe through trade in silk, spices, and precious stones, brought by caravans and ships from India, China, and Japan. However, in 1453, the Turks conquered Constantinople, disrupting these routes and making them unsafe due to frequent attacks on Christian vessels in the Mediterranean. Thus, a more practicable route became necessary. In the early 15th century, Portuguese sea captains began exploring the western coast of Africa, and by the century's end, they had rounded the Cape of Good Hope in search of a water route to the Indies. Meanwhile, Spain, then the most powerful nation in Europe, adopted a different approach. This approach, and how it was carried out, is best understood through the life and work of the great sea captain and navigator, Christopher Columbus. More than 450 years ago, there lived in the city of Genoa a poor working man who made his living by preparing wool for spinners. He had 4 sons, the eldest of whom was Christopher, born in 1436. Young Christopher was not very different from most other boys in Genoa. He likely joined in everyday sports, visited the wharves to see the many vessels that sailed in and out of the seaport, and listened for hours to sailor stories about distant lands. However, he also learned his father's trade and studied reading, arithmetic, grammar, geography, and map drawing. Geography particularly fascinated him as it allowed his imagination to wander far over the sea into lands beyond. In map drawing, Columbus acquired such skill that he could earn his living by making maps and charts. Little else is known about his boyhood and youth, but it's likely much of his early life was spent at sea, sailing on the Mediterranean and along the west coast of Africa. Once he went as far north as England, and perhaps even farther, although this is uncertain. During his many voyages, he heard much about Portuguese sailors and discoverers, for Portugal was one of the greatest sea powers in the world. Around the age of 35, Columbus moved to Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, where his brother Bartholomew lived, and where he would be at the heart of maritime exploration. Columbus was a man of commanding presence, large, tall, dignified, with a ruddy complexion and piercing blue-gray eyes. By the age of 30, his hair had turned white and fell in wavy locks about his shoulders. Despite his life of hardship and poverty, he carried himself like a gentleman, with pleasing and courteous manners. His strong will overcame difficulties that would have overwhelmed most men. While living in Lisbon, Columbus married a woman of higher social standing and moved with her to the Madeira Islands, where her family had business interests. Meanwhile, Columbus contemplated schemes for a future voyage to the countries of the Far East. His native city, Genoa, had grown rich trading in the silks, spices, and precious stones of the Indies. But the overland journey was dangerous, and a water route was highly desired. While Portuguese sea captains were exploring the west coast of Africa for a passage around the southern Cape, Columbus envisioned a more daring course. He planned to sail directly west from the Canary Islands, across the Atlantic Ocean, expecting to find the far-famed Indies at the end of his voyage. Columbus was so committed to his plan that it became the central focus of his life. A water route that could safely bring the wealth of the East to Europe would be the greatest discovery of the age. His ambition was fueled by the thrilling accounts of the noted traveler, Marco Polo, who 2 centuries earlier had brought back tales of golden palaces, marvelous rivers crossed by marble bridges, and countless treasures of gold, silver, and jewels from far-off China. Around 1484, Columbus presented his scheme to King John of Portugal. Although the king did not promise assistance, he borrowed ideas from Columbus's charts and sent his men to explore the western route. They encountered stormy weather, and fearing the unknown ocean, returned to port without finding land. When Columbus learned of the king's actions, he was indignant and left Portugal for Spain, where he hoped to find support for his plan. Columbus's future seemed bleak without a helping friend. Leading his young son Diego by the hand, Columbus trudged wearily on his journey, eventually placing Diego in the care of his aunt near Palos. He then sought an audience with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. However, the king and queen were preoccupied with driving the Moors out of Spain, making it difficult for Columbus to secure a hearing. When Columbus finally presented his plans to a council of learned men, they ridiculed him for claiming the world was round and that people lived on the opposite side of the earth. They argued that such people must have their heads downward and rain would fall upward. However, some learned men agreed with Columbus and believed his plan, if supported by the Spanish crown, would bring honor and wealth to Spain. Yet the majority saw Columbus as a dreamer or adventurer. Despite years of scorn and ridicule, Columbus never lost hope. Encouraged by a few friends, he followed the king and queen's court, even fighting in the Spanish army. He faced taunts and mocking from street boys, but his determination never wavered. In autumn 1491, Columbus decided to leave Spain for France, taking his son Diego with him. While on their journey, they stopped at the gate of the convent of St. Mary near Palos to beg for bread and water. The good before the convent, a learned man, became interested in Columbus's story. He arranged a meeting with other learned men, including the well-known sea captain, Martin Alonso Pinzon, who promised to furnish money for an expedition and accompany it himself. The prior, who had been Queen Isabella's confessor, won her over to Columbus's cause. The queen sent Columbus nearly $1,200 and summoned him back to court. Supplied with provisions and clothing, Columbus met with the queen, who approved his plan. However, Columbus's demand for a substantial reward delayed the agreement until one of the queen's advisors convinced her to support him. An agreement was reached, and Columbus, with tears of joy, accepted his commission. He went to Palos to gather men and vessels for the expedition, facing serious difficulties. Sailors were terrified of the Atlantic Ocean, which they called the Sea of Darkness, and feared sea monsters and storms. To secure enough crew, a royal decree was issued, and criminals were released from prisons to join the expedition. The fleet consisted of 3 caravels, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina. The Santa Maria, the largest, was Columbus's flagship, while the other 2 were smaller. On August 3, 1492, this fleet, with 120 men and provisions for a year, set sail from Palos. It was a sorrowful hour for the sailors, who feared they would never return. Columbus steered for the Canary Islands, where he repaired the Pinta's rudder before setting sail again on September 6. Out of sight of land, the sailors wept in fear. Their trials were just beginning. The compass needle no longer pointed to the North Star, alarming the superstitious sailors. Vast stretches of seaweed added to their fears as they imagined they might be trapped or wrecked on hidden rocks. Despite these challenges, the trade winds bore them onward. When the wind shifted, their fears of being unable to return to Spain were alleviated. Signs of land, such as birds and floating branches, appeared, but land remained elusive. Sailors grew desperate, pleading with Columbus to turn back. They even plotted to throw him overboard, but Columbus's strong will and faith kept him resolute. On October 11, 1492, unmistakable signs of land appeared. A thorn branch with berries, a reed, and a carved stick. Eagerly, the sailors kept watch. At about 10 p.m., Columbus saw a distant light like a torch. Early the next morning, a sailor on the Pinta saw a strip of land. This was an island in the Bahama group, and on October 12, 1492, Columbus and his men eagerly awaited daylight to go ashore. Dressed in a rich scarlet robe, Columbus carried the royal standard, while his followers bore banners with green crosses and the initials of Ferdinand and Isabella. Columbus knelt, weeping for joy, and took possession of the land in the name of the Spanish king and queen. Thank you for watching. Remember, you are an essential part of our community. If you found this video insightful or thought-provoking, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel for more dose of informative and educational videos.